Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. My special guest today is Jim Ferguson, the founder and CEO, executive director of Freedom Train International, and we're going to be talking about the UK election results when we come back momentarily.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist.
As Sash of the Cat demonstrates, please like the station and subscribe if you haven't. If you need to resubscribe because people are always being unsubscribed, do so. We appreciate your help and your support. We're fighting for your freedom, just like my guest today is. And Jim, it's so nice to see you again. I saw you in Ottawa when you were here for a very special visit from Christine Anderson was in town and had a chance to meet you, and it was wonderful. And we said at some time we would do this, and I'm sorry it's taken so long to get around to it, but it's such a pleasure to have you here. And so much to talk about. I promise not to take up too much of your time, but it's going to be interesting just to go through what these results mean from the UK election. I'm just going to briefly, for those viewers who aren't apprised, Labour won a massive majority, 412 seats, and Conservatives were reduced to 121. And the remainder was sort of between parties, that some of which got way more than the percentage should have allowed, and others got way less than you would have thought they would have received. And it's interesting. There were 5 Reform MPs elected. This is a first. And Reform did not get as many seats as the popular vote might have indicated. But that of course, is not any surprise. George Galloway was defeated after winning a by-election, which I think is interesting because he was probably one of the only independent voices in the House of Commons prior to Neil Farage and the Reform Party coming in. And of course, your summation of the election, Jim, I thought was fascinating because you had some interesting things to say about the leader of the Labour Party, who will be the incoming Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. I found it fascinating. It's just from a purely political science point of view. Labour got 2/3 of the seats in the House of Commons, almost literally 2/3, and they got 1/3 of the popular vote. Now, that wouldn't be possible in Canada, which operates the same kind of parliamentary system as you do. It's a first past the post. But to get into that kind of massive majority territory, any party would have to have at least 40% or more. You're only getting in the majority territory with 38% of the vote. Yet Labour did it with 33% of the vote. And I almost consider this to be one of the best advertisements I've ever seen for proportional representation. And I'm very ambivalent about proportional representation. So there's sometimes I think it might be a good idea. Other times I think it might be a bad idea. But this certainly seems to be an indication that there's something askew, something wrong with the way these numbers are adding up in terms of seats in the House of Commons. But you've said that this vote, you believe, is not so much in the embrace, the British people embracing the Labour Party as it is repudiating the Conservative Party and Richie Sunak. Could you explain that?
Well, first of all, David, it's marvelous to actually be here on your show. You've got a fantastic channel, and yeah, it was great to meet you in person in Ottawa when I went over there, and it was nice to spend time with Christine Anderson as well, of course. But you know, what we've witnessed here is what's called an electoral landslide, where there is just an incredible move to a particular political party, in this case, the Labour Party, and the Conservatives have had an electoral wipeout. They've never had such a disastrous election result in history. This is the worst it's ever been. And I think partly a lot of that is we've had a number of different prime ministers, the last one being Rishi Sunak, who was not democratically elected by the members of the Conservative Party either. He was installed. But his policies, and his leadership style was very much more an administrator for the World Economic Forum and the Globalists, because the Conservative Party in the UK, like many other countries, have this uniparty system where they've been deeply infiltrated by globalists, people who are really sort of sold on the whole globalism idea and not putting their own people first or their interests first. So what we've actually witnessed here, because Keir Starmer, his popularity is not high. His polling as a person, as a leader, is not high. But I do believe that the reaction to Sunak in particular, the way that he's mishandled the whole campaign, right from the outset when he was involved in sort of addressing the nation in the pouring rain, I think that gave a bit of a flavour to what was to come. But he is a globalist. Keir Starmer is a globalist. Now, what's really quite serious about this is that I have, through other people, got connections into those who are at very senior levels within the defence establishment. We're talking real top brass here. So what they've been saying behind closed doors, effectively, they would never say it publicly, of course. But what they're saying is that Rishi Sunak, for the last 9 months, they've been saying Rishi Sunak does not want to be a wartime prime minister. And when he called the early election on the July the 4th, that was a clear indication that he was making a bolt straight for the exit door. And there is a deep concern because conscription has been actively talked about in the UK now for the last few months. They're talking about calling up young men and women, 18-year-olds, to military service. They've threatened that if they refuse, they could be arrested. So that happens usually when there's a prelude to war. They haven't given up on Ukraine. They haven't stopped the attacks on Russia, whether that's political attacks, whether that's, sort of the kind of things that you read about in the media. That whole narrative about Russia moving its borders closer to NATO, for example, is a complete misnomer. NATO has, in fact, been moving their borders closer to Russia. So the whole Ukraine thing is about, in my opinion, about to ignite again. And I think we've seen Mark Rutte, the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, now been installed to replace Stoltenberg as the NATO commander, the NATO leader. And I think it's now just a matter of time before we actually see boots on the ground. And I think that the timing of that might be the autumn of this year. So that's something to watch very carefully. I'm not a pacifist, but I don't like unnecessary wars, in particular bankers' wars. And I see the corruption that's been taking place in Ukraine, the amounts of money that Canada has sent, the United States, Britain, other European nations. While some of these Kiev MPs are running around in Ferraris with mansions, the corruption is off the charts. It's been widely discussed, the fact that they can't become members of NATO because of the problems with the corruption as well. So we are seeing and witnessing something that's truly fundamental. And I've spent probably the last 4 weeks going across 4 different nations. I've been in Geneva, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Denmark, back to London, and of course Ireland as well. And what I'm learning is that there is this real build-up of people who are really concerned about where their national governments are taking them. The globalist and infiltrated governments are looking to take them. Most people don't want war. Most people recognize that ordinary people, regardless of whatever country they're from, are just people. They're just like us. But it's our national leaders that are pushing it. And of course, they're never the ones to fix bayonets and go in with their rifles. They always send other people's sons and daughters to die in these battlefields. And I'm very much opposed to that.
Well, we're on the same page there, Jim. I am very much opposed to any war with Russia, especially over Ukraine. I think it's the most corrupt state in Europe. It's dominated by corrupt politicians, including the president, who really has no legitimacy right now. He did not run for re-election. but Volodymyr Zelensky is one of the most corrupt politicians on the face of the earth. And we are pouring billions of dollars into this black hole of Kiev. That's how I describe this process. So that we can have a war with Russia that will escalate inevitably into a nuclear conflict. This is insanity. And there's no question Britain was on the road to war. This talk about national service and conscription so that they can have an army to fight Russia is just as insane as France talking about putting an army together to fight Russia. The last time, of course, France tried to fight Russia, it ended up in the debacle of Napoleon's retreat in 1812. So France hasn't had a lot of success with wars in the 20th or 21st century. So I thought that was nuts. But I looked at this election again this morning, and I thought one way to describe it, and of course we both share a monarchy in Canada and the U.S., and we always like to say that the king is dead, long live the king. This to me was the Uniparty is dead, long live the Uniparty, because
Correct.
we destroyed the Conservative Party, but the Labour Party has taken its place. And as you're saying, it looks like they've got the same policies, that they're going to be gearing up the country for conscription, for a war. And here was Rishi Sunak talking just days before the vote about how he was going to take away people's driver's licenses and bank accounts if they resisted conscription. What kind of insanity is that? I mean, obviously, he almost like he wanted to lose. And perhaps you said it at the very beginning here. He really didn't want to win this. He didn't want to be the prime minister, and he did everything possible to lose this election. But do you think Britain is out of step with the rest of Europe? Because we had the European Union elections a couple of weeks ago. Overwhelmingly, we saw, and I won't use the word or phrase far-right parties. I call them conservative populist parties. Overwhelmingly, were victors. And in France last weekend, we saw the same thing happening. And I think this weekend, we're going to see Marine Le Pen's party take the grand share of the vote, and not because they are some sort of racist or fascist party, but because they offer a more populist view and a more sensible view in terms of not wanting a war with Russia. But is the UK out of step with the rest of Europe right now?
Well, they are in regards to that. But I mean, one of the big takeaways is that the Conservatives were polling poor third in practically every constituency. Reform UK were coming a good second. Now, for example, if you put these things into context, Keir Starmer, the Labour Party, got 4 million votes. Well, my apologies, it's the other way around. The Labour Party got 3.5 million votes, but Reform UK got 4 million. So the first past the post system's a hard one for the smaller parties to get through. But I would watch Reform UK very, very closely now that Nigel Farage is back in as leader. Because even just a few weeks ago, it was predicted that they would absolutely not get any seats. When he took the leadership back, we witnessed a firestorm of activity within the media, within social media, online, and all over. And really what he did was he captured the heart and the mood of the country again, a little bit similar to what he did with the Brexit party that he created, and which I was a parliamentary candidate with in Europe and in Westminster. So if he'd had a bit longer, there was another aspect to Rishi Sunak calling a July 4th election, because they knew as soon as Nigel kind of get back into the driving seat again, he would ignite the country behind him. But I think that come 2029, they've now got 5 members of parliament, and Nigel is one of the best orators and public debaters you could ever meet. Even before I got involved with him and the Brexit party, I used to watch him running circles around Juncker and all these other Europhiles in the European Parliament. There was really nobody that could stand against him. Now he's gone into Westminster. It's going to be lively. It's going to be interesting. In many ways, I'm sorry that George Galloway didn't get in. I like George Galloway. He's a fellow Scot. He's an anti-globalist. I don't agree with all of his points of view, but he is somebody that speaks his mind, and he does say what he means, and he means what he says. But I would watch Reform, because what I think might well happen is Sir Keir Starmer has now been installed as Prime Minister, And he's constantly talking about changing the country. And that sends chills down my spine because I'm not sure exactly what change he's talking about. I don't anticipate it to be good change. If he's going to push for conscription, if he's going to send young men and women to die in the battlefields of Ukraine against Russia, you're talking about body bags. Now, he may think that he's going to get away with that. I think the country may have another view on that as well. And I don't think people fully appreciate what they've done by electing him in and his party with such a large majority. But you mentioned something earlier on. I'd like to come back to that, David, before I go on to France and the rest of Europe. And that was that, did Rishi Sunak deliberately lose? I have no doubt that he did. And I think he, for example, at the Remembrance Day parades, he disrespected, he went back for a meeting in London that he could have done over Zoom. He should have stayed there. That caused great upset, not even just within the political realms, but within people who have served their country, veterans, people whose families served in World War I, World War II, and other conflicts around the world. That was a highly disrespectful thing for him to do. And I wouldn't put it past him to have deliberately destroyed the Conservative Party so that he could hand the baton over to his World Economic Forum colleague, Keir Starmer, knowing that they were probably going to get a massive landslide, which means that they can really do whatever they want to do now. They are in power with a huge majority. And I think we're going to see a push towards war. I have a horrible feeling that we're going to see that kicking off quite soon. Now, Marine Le Pen, that's another completely, that came out like a bolt out the blue. She is polling incredibly highly. Macron panicked. He's called for early elections. And unless they cheat, I would imagine, I do imagine that Marine Le Pen is going to do very, very well. She could be the next president of France. And she is also a very powerful orator. She delivers speeches incredibly well. She's also very experienced. She's been in this business a long time now. But we're also seeing similar people, Viktor Orban in Hungary. We're seeing other nations whose people are very worried about this direction that the globalists are trying to take us in. Most people I've spoken to in Denmark, in the Netherlands, in Switzerland, in France, in Germany, and Ireland, they just want to live their lives in peace. But we're also seeing a very similar pattern taking place, in particular in Ireland at the moment, with massive illegal immigration that is literally destroying whole communities. I mean, the Irish population is only 3 million, but it's sitting at 5 million right now, and that has increased by that number within the last 4 to 5 years. And that is nearly all illegal immigrants that have flooded into the country. So we're seeing a period of chaos coming, great destabilization, and Freedom International is getting people together in multiple nations now, with multiple thousands of members in the United States, Canada, of course. Canada is a huge supporter of the work that we're doing. And I think it's because they led the way with the freedom movement. So there's everything to watch. It's all happening right now.
I think you're right about leading the way with the freedom movement. I've heard that from so many Americans as well. And I did not expect Canadians to be that unwilling to serve the government, because Canada has traditionally been very acquiescent to government control. And that was a definite sea change in public attitudes in Canada. But as you know, we have a globalist prime minister in this country named Justin Trudeau, who is seems to be very much a globalist in the WEF frame of mind. And I'm at times worried about Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative Party leader, because he is standing arm in arm with Justin Trudeau on Ukraine, and he is reluctant to go with what most of the grassroots conservatives in this country feel, which is we've got to stop this war. We've got to stop giving away billions of dollars, because our own national defense is literally falling to pieces, and we have no ammunition left. We've given away all our tanks. We have nothing left to defend our own country. Lots to give Ukraine, but nothing our own country. But I have been optimistic also, because Pierre Poilievre has said on numerous occasions, and I've been present at many of these occasions, when he said he will forbid his caucus members to go to the WEF meetings in Davos. And of course, conservatives in the past have been very willing to go to Davos with the World Economic Forum to become part of that whole thing. So I'm literally hoping against hope that Poilievre is serious about this, and we don't have a uniparty in Canada. But I have a clip here I'd really like you to see, because if I saw anything that indicated to me that this Keir Starmer is even more dangerous potentially than Justin Trudeau, this clip, I think, indicates it.
To ask you quickly, you have to choose now between Davos or Westminster.
Davos.
Why?
Because Westminster is too constrained, and it's closed, and we're not having meaning. Once you get out of Westminster, whether it's Davos or anywhere else, you actually engage with people that you can see working with in the future. Westminster is a tribal shouting place.
So, is this guy working for the World Economic Forum or for Britons? Clearly, his loyalty is very much in question. I just found this outrageous.
Yes, I mean, I remember when that clip came out, I think I reposted it as well. But I mean, if you needed a clear indication of where his loyalties lay, that's it. And he was being honest about that. For once, he was being really honest. And he said, yeah, Davos is where it's at. So I think he is a globalist. Unfortunately, it's certainly in the UK, both the Conservative Party was conservative in name only. They were no longer conservative in terms of policy. Traditional, good, strong on defence, tough on crime, supporting law and order, good education systems, getting our children properly taught. Those were the sort of the core beliefs and values of true conservatives. Probably the same most of the world as well. But they've completely changed their focus. And then you've got the Labour Party, which is a completely different entity to what Sir Keir Hardie, another fellow Scot of mine, started back in Glasgow back in the day. And, if he came back to see what was happening now, he would be horrified. So in the Brexit Party, for example, there was about 40 to 45% of the people involved in Brexit who were actually from the traditional left, which surprised me. I have to say it was a bit of a wake-up call for me, because I suddenly found myself sitting around the table. I thought it would be a lot of Conservatives or a lot of United Kingdom Independence Party people. And they, of course, were there. But there was a lot of people from the traditional Labour left who were staunch Brexiteers. And that's why I nearly won my seat. I stood in Barnsley East as the candidate in the previous election in 2019 and came top of all the people in the country. Myself and my colleague came first and second in the entire country. So, and my team were from the traditional left, but they embraced me. They knew that I was a former Conservative. I was right of centre, but they were a great bunch of people. So I think sometimes left and right can come together. It was an important lesson for me to learn. But when people talk about far left or far right, that was just a complete piece of nonsense. And they used to laugh in the Brexit Party about being called far right, especially when they were left of centre. But most of them were very moderate. I'm a pretty moderate kind of guy as well. I'm pretty much down the line with most things. I'm a little bit right of centre, I would say, in some aspects. But I get along with people that don't necessarily always agree with me, or I would agree with them. I think the important part of this, and what we're doing in Freedom Train, is that we're bringing people together for the common, to find that common ground of living in peace, having politicians who are principled and who will put their own countrymen and women first. And I remember when, just before I went over to see you in Ottawa, I'd actually been across in the States just about a week or so before that. And I was on stage and I was actually asked if I would lead the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag. And I agreed to do that, and I'm not an American. I'll probably never be an American. But the point is, hand on heart, I led the Pledge of Allegiance and everybody recited it behind me that was in the audience. There was probably about 300 people there. And although I'm not an American, I still felt that deep sort of respect to them as the American people and to the flag itself, because they are our allies, just like Canada is our ally. And I remember, coming from a long line of military service, the Canadians who sacrificed their lives and who stood with us in the war, in World War I and World War II in particular, And you know, you're right to say the Canadians are a very peaceful people. They're actually lovely people. I love the Canadian people. But you know, there is a real backbone there. And when I say they led the world, they really did. They were the beacon to the entire planet when the Freedom Convoy stood up in that principled, peaceful way and said, we do not comply. We're not going along with this. And of course, we saw what happened. The police brutality, the baton charges, the tear gas, the things that happened to them. It also happened in the state of Victoria in Australia. They were deeply brutalized as well. But I think Canada possibly had it worse, if I'm being honest. But, you know, you guys led the way. And that's why when I launched Freedom Train International, which is still in its infancy, we're only a few months old, although it was 15 months in the planning. It took that long to build that network with friends in Canada and America and Europe and Australia, New Zealand, and of course the UK. But you know, you saw that power building there, and Canada was seen as the leaders of that freedom movement. So when we launched at the beginning of this year, we did it on the anniversary of the Canadian freedom movement and the truckers who stood up for their freedoms and for their communities. So I have a deep respect for you guys, and I think that this is where I'm now traveling to a lot of other countries, in particular across Europe right now. I'm probably going to be heading to France and Germany and possibly Norway and then Sweden. So I'm the reason I'm going physically to these nations is because I'm meeting the leaders of existing freedom movements and organizations. I'm explaining to them what we're doing. And to date, every single person I've spoken to who has got a freedom movement or a community together is now coming on board with us. They're going to be in leadership positions. They're going to be unburdened with all the administration. We're going to take care of all of that. And we're going to be building hubs and local community networks. So we're operating now at the strategic, tactical, and operational levels across multiple nations now. And I'd love to get back to Canada because I've got so many friends there, people that I haven't had a chance, I've built up a great relationship with, but I haven't actually had a chance to meet yet. So there is work to be done in Europe, and then there is work to be done across the pond in the United States and Canada as well. So there's a lot for me to do. This is going to be a very busy year, already is. But I'm very grateful to see you again, be on your show, and to just to say, you call it out, you call the truth, and we are definitely very closely aligned on all of that. So I pay tribute to you and what you're doing. It's a great piece of work.
Well, thank you. And we will have all the information that people require to support you and the Freedom Train International in the description. I think it's an interesting concept because you're transnational, but you're anti-globalist, and I think that's you're reaching out to like-minded people, but not only that, you're reaching out to like-minded democracies, because one of the conundrums for me is how the English-speaking world, which used to, as Winston Churchill described the English-speaking peoples as the most democratic, from Great Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the United States. All of these countries have a very similar tradition, a very similar heritage. They were all originally colonized by Great Britain, but they inherited those British concepts of fair play, rule of law, democratic process, and freedom of speech, which of course is being eradicated at a huge rate and at an escalating rate in all of these countries. Right now, Canada is facing the worst censorship bill in the democratic world, called the Online Harms Act, Bill C-63. And if we don't stop this thing, and if it's passed into law and not repealed, Canada will be no better than some petty dictatorship. But I wanted to go back just for a minute to a couple of clips here, including one of Richie Sunak, which I think is interesting. And of course, the good news is reform has made some strides forward here. And I think that Nigel Farage riding
National
the line
service will be compulsory. The military option will be something that people choose to do.
Oh, I see. So how will you make people do it?
Sorry?
If national service is going to be compulsory, how will you make people do it?
Well, you'll have a set of sanctions and incentives, and we will look at the models that are existing around Europe to get the appropriate mix of those. There's a range of different options that exist.
For example?
There's all sorts of things that people do across Europe, whether that's looking at driving licenses, other access to finance, all sorts of other things. The right thing to do is to allow...
Access to finance? So if people don't want to do national service, what, you're going to take their bank cards away? What do you mean?
There's access. there's lots of different models around Europe. There's lots of different models around Europe. This is being done in multiple countries in Europe.
I don't doubt it. I'm just asking you what you think.
So there's a range of things, and we will have a Royal Commission look at all of those, come back to the government and recommend what the appropriate mix of incentives and sanctions is.
My God, a Royal Commission. I mean, that to me says it all. This is a man who's begging to lose the election. I'm going to take your bank cards away. I'm going to take your driver's license. Don't vote for me, please. But of course, if there's any consolation for Richie Sunak, his successor is going to be just as bad. But I have one more clip I wanted to show as well, because Nigel Farage, who I've really admired since the whole Brexit victory, which I think was the beginning of a turnaround. And it was perhaps it's been abrogated to some degree by this election. And certainly I was hoping for a few more seats for Nigel in the party. But he describes in this interview how his inspiration for the Reform Party name came from Canada. And I worked for a member of Parliament who was one of the early leading proponents of the Reform Party. He was a Reform Party member of Parliament. And I worked at the House of Commons during those early days of the Reform Party being the official opposition. It was the only party I ever felt good about being a member of. I haven't belonged to a political party in probably 15 or 20 years. As a journalist, I don't think anybody should be a member of a political party. But in those days, I was definitely fighting for national defense through what I thought was the only party that had a coherent program. But I just wanted to share this interview.
Just as happened to a party called Reform in Canada some years ago. Everyone said, oh no, reform will split the vote, Preston Manning's a right-wing nut job, all the same kind of criticisms. And in the end, Reform won. And as you know, Stephen Harper proved to be a very good Prime Minister in many ways of Canada, having first been elected as a Reform MP and then effectively doing a reverse takeover of the very tired and increasingly progressive Conservative Party. I am trying to do something very similar to what Reform did in Canada all those 30 years ago. And to be honest with you, it's one of the reasons I chose the name Reform UK, seeing inspiration from what happened when common sense got back into Canadian politics. Sadly now long disappeared under Trudeau. So look, we're going to get, we're going to get millions of votes. We're going to win those seats, but I'm going to do this differently. This is not going to be just about what we can do in Parliament. We are going to build, this is my ambition, we're going to build a mass movement for common sense. And we're going to build it not just because we object to what the progressives have done to us, but because we believe in family, community, and country.
Yeah, so my question there, after listening to this, I'm saying, fantastic. I'm glad you were inspired by Canada. But of course, we're already hearing, even from members of the old Canadian Alliance Party, which of course was the second incarnation of Reform before it merged into the Conservative Party of Canada today. We're already hearing, like Stockwell Day came out with a post on X today. Of course, Stockwell Day was one of the leaders of the Canadian Alliance Party. He was the official opposition leader in Canada for quite a few years. He's saying it's time to unite the right in Britain. And of course, we heard that time after time after time in Canada. And all that meant was the Reform Party being absorbed back into the Conservative Party. It didn't exactly happen that way because I think of the strength of Stephen Harper's leadership. But do you think it's possible in the UK for the Reform Party to become the true small c Conservative Party and to absorb the membership of the Conservative Party that is truly conservative? Can it go the other way? In other words, instead of the establishment Conservative Party simply absorbing the Reform Party and saying, forget it, you're never going to make government, so just come back to the fold. Do you think it's possible for Nigel Farage, because of the strength of his convictions, because of the power of his oratory, and because of the fact he actually believes in what he says, do you think he can capture what is left of the Conservative Party and become the dominant right of center party in the UK, the dominant populist Conservative Party?
I absolutely do. And, there's a clip of me at the church in Darfield. I think it was the day after the election in 2019, when I was thanking all the supporters, giving a little bit of an update. And I left a clue because I knew what the new party was going to be. I was actually deeply recruited into the Brexit Party. I was involved in some of the vetting and the screening of people that wanted to come into the party. I was a parliamentary candidate at that point, but I was leading teams in London and I was traveling all over the country. So I knew, and I left a clue, and I said, perhaps what this country really needs is reform. And that's still out there. So I knew what it was going to become. That was in December 2019. Nigel Farage, if anybody thinks he's going to be content just to be elected to Parliament and leave it at that, listen, they cancelled his bank accounts. The establishment attacked him when he wasn't even really that political. He was the vice president of Reform at that point. It was under different leadership, not very good leadership, but it was under different leadership. He wasn't really that active. He was on GB News. He was quite happy doing the programs that he was doing. Then they attacked him and they cancelled his bank accounts. And that really provoked him into doing something. And he's not the kind of guy that sits back and takes it. He is a fighter. And I completely understand why. So what he's now going to do, he's now got himself and 4 other colleagues, so 5 of them into the British Parliament. The Conservative Party has had the worst electoral wipeout ever. They have been massacred. And those that are left are hanging on by the smallest margins. Even the Chancellor, former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, only got through with about 800 votes. And they're all in the same camp. Now, what's really interesting is that when you break down the seat statistical data, you will see that Reform came a very good second in practically every seat in the country, with the Conservatives a very poor third. Now, that tells me that they have fractured, they've disintegrated, they are on the downward curve. And I think what Nigel Farage is going to do between now and 2029 is he's going to capture that country. He's not done. He is now going to use the platform that he's got, and he is going to build that support up, and he is going to unite the right. So the United Kingdom Independence Party, the ADF, the Heritage Party, all those other sort of centre-right parties now have a beacon of hope. And I think if they all work together and truly unite the right, then it will be a landslide victory for him, and he could very well be the next Prime Minister. Because what we're talking about, what you showed in those clips, is the direction of travel that Keir Starmer and his globalist movement are going to take us. They're taking us to war. Richie Sunak was preparing the way before him. These are globalists. They do not care about our young men and women. They will send them to be slaughtered to make a point with Vladimir Putin. And by the way, if anybody wants to really know why they hate Vladimir Putin so much, it was because he was a member of the World Economic Forum Young Leaders. And he learned all their dark secrets, and they thought they had him on side. And then when they said, we want you to sacrifice Mother Russia on the altar of globalism, he said no. And he went back because he is a nationalist. He is a patriot for Russia. And I have to say, that is there's a lot of truth to that. That's why they dislike him so much. So they want the resources, they want the power, and Russia, being the size of the country and the nation that it is a major obstacle to the globalist New World Order. So China, of course, is playing a big geopolitical part in all of this. But the West is weak, and they know that they're weak. They're weak because they keep pushing trans ideology. They're disintegrating families. They're attacking the family unit with all this kind of nonsense. And that is weakening us. And there are those that think that the World Economic Forum and the globalists are actually quite pro-China because of the way they have their credit scoring system. If you say anything about the state, you get docked a certain amount of points. Then doors won't open for you at the supermarket. You can't get on board a train. That's the kind of system that Justin Trudeau celebrates and has openly admired in Canada. You have a tyrant in your parliament and in your government. And Chrystia Freeland, his deputy, is a senior board member of the World Economic Forum as well. So you guys got a big problem over there. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. I've said for quite some time, I think NATO is disintegrating. And I used to write talking points for NATO. I was over in Bosnia when NATO decided to change or find a new mission because, of course, the Cold War was over and they had to find something to do to justify their continued existence. I think NATO should have folded at the end of the Soviet Union. And when the Warsaw Pact disbanded, I think NATO should have disbanded. It's way past its shelf life. I don't know what it's doing out there anymore except fomenting conflict with Russia, except gambling, the high stakes poker with the fate of the world. And I think if NATO wants a war with Russia, it's going to have some better arguments than it currently does. And I think you can see NATO splintering and literally falling apart before your eyes right now as Hungary goes one way, as France is saying, the French people are saying no. But, you've said a couple of times during this interview that you are seriously concerned that Starmer is going to take Britain into war with Russia. Can he do it alone? If the alliance continues to disintegrate and the support amongst other NATO member nations is just simply not there, can he take Britain into war alone?
Well, what would happen, because the way the NATO, and you'll know this as well, David, the Article 5 it would be triggered if there is any kind of attack on any NATO member. And I think they've almost been trying to goad Russia into doing that. But what Russia is saying is Ukraine is not a NATO member. If you put boots on the ground in Ukraine, we've seen what's happened to the Abrams tanks. We've seen what's happened to the Challenger tanks from Britain. They've been destroyed. And any forces that go in from Britain or anybody else into fight Russia in Ukraine are going to be considered legitimate targets. We're going to see body bags building up. And I don't want to see that. I don't think it's our business to be in there. But that could put massive pressure on him if he tries to force conscription on people in this country. He could end up having a civil war situation. And all it takes is 3% of any population in any country to get serious. And no police force, no military will stop them. That was evidenced by the revolution that took place in America for the War of Independence. It was only 3% of Americans that actually fought against the British Empire at that point, and they won.
Well, that's true. And as former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter likes to say, 1 million people came out in 1982 to Central Park to protest nuclear war, potential nuclear war. It seems to be the last thing on most politicians' minds today. You talk about when we are closer to nuclear war now than we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis, or at least at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. And I don't think the politicians who are leading us seem to live in a perpetual state of delusion. And I've heard other commentators say this. I said this a couple of months back. I said, it's like they're living in a lie. They just don't seem to get the reality of the world they're living in. We are encroaching upon Ukraine cannot be a member of NATO. We cannot continue to fool ourselves into thinking that the invasion of Ukraine was somehow completely unprovoked by the West and NATO. We had nothing to do with this at all. And that no matter what we do, it's all going to work out somehow. So I think we need to continue to sound the alarm that we are very, very close to nuclear war, but it's never inevitable. Nuclear war has never been inevitable, and we can still fight it. But we need, I think, people to realize how dangerous these times are that we're living in. And if people aren't aware of that, and as you say, 3%, if we can get 3% of the population to rise up and say, no, we are not going to march to our deaths in a nuclear catastrophe on the battlefields of Ukraine. We are not going to allow NATO to convince us that the future lies in perpetual war. I think civilization and I think common sense conservatives have a chance, and I think we can bank on that. But we need organizations like yours, as Freedom Train International, to continue to fight for those rights and to fight for that truth. And what the thing I admire, I think, most about what you're doing is you emphasize freedom of speech. Because what I tell my audience every day is that if we don't have freedom of speech in the UK, in Canada, in the United States, in Australia, New Zealand, we don't have freedom. We don't have democracy. We are no better than some tin pot dictatorship. And thank you, Jim, for fighting for free speech, because without it, there is no freedom.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's absolutely true. And of course, I very much agree. And thank you for saying the thing you said. And one of the other things that we need to be watching very closely is the next big event, which is coming up in America with the US elections.
Exactly.
I'm going to be doing work for a number of weeks and several months in Europe and across the nations there. But I'm going to be heading to the United States and probably Canada as well. So if I'm coming over, I'm definitely going to come and see you, David. I would love to see you again. And maybe we can organize something there. But yeah, I'm going to be doing some work over there. And I mean, I was across 8 different states last year, on stage, giving talks, talking about the kind of things we're talking about. And they're deeply concerned. They were back then, even more so now, especially when you see the likes of Biden, who's quite clearly not really fit. I suspect he's going to be replaced really quite soon. I don't think he can continue. I think they know if he continues in post to face off against Trump, for example, he's just going to lose it and Trump will get in. And of course, the globalists really fear another term of the Trump being in as president, because I actually think he was quite mild the last time he was in. I mean, he was under constant attack. He used to shrug it off. But they've relentlessly gone after him, his business interests, his family. And I think you might see a very different side of Trump. I know if I was Trump and I got back in, I would be going after every single globalist on this planet. I wouldn't stop at just in America. I would be pursuing them wherever they were. I'd be arresting them, I'd be prosecuting them, and I'd be putting them in prison for a very long period of time. So I don't know whether Trump would do that or not. I suspect he might. But I think they are really fearful of a second presidency, another term, which means that when you see headlines like H5N1 avian influenza coming out of Texas, poultry, then into cattle, and then people coming down with it, then they say it's in the milk supplies, and then they say it's in the eggs. I'm just a bit concerned that we're maybe heading towards something that's planned, something that's going to interfere with the elections in America again. And before you know it, there'll be huge boxes of ballots coming in, postal ballots coming in, and Biden's going to win. I really think people have had enough of the dishonesty and the corruption in politics. And if that were to happen, having spoken to so many people in the United States, we could be looking at a very serious situation, because I don't think people are going to take it.
No, I agree with you. I don't think Biden will stay on the ticket. But I don't think any alternative to Biden is going to put the Democrats over the top in the presidential election. I think people have just had way too much of the Democratic corruption. I think Trump is destined to win. And he certainly has problems. He has issues, but he is so strong on so many of the right issues that I don't see any alternative. And the Democrats can only offer more of the same, and so I'm optimistic about the elections in November, and I certainly think Donald Trump is going to be victorious. But as you said, I am concerned again about another phony pandemic, about lockdowns, about ballot harvesting. about the same shenanigans that went on 4 years ago, happening again, about Joe Biden running a campaign from his basement again, saying as little as possible, and ending up with the same result. But I don't think it's going to happen this time. I just think the history and momentum is on Donald Trump's side. And I think that Joe Biden can never recover from that debate, which was catastrophic, which is totally devastating. But anyway, I thank you so much, Jim, for joining me today. And please look me up when you're in Canada, and let's not wait another 8 months to talk. Let's do another show together within the next 2 or 3 months. And I really appreciate everything you've shared with us today, and because we really admire the work you're doing.
I really appreciate being on with you, David. It's great to see you again. And, they talk about the Great Reset. I think what we're witnessing truly is the Great Awakening. People all around the world, in Canada, the United States, the Great Britain, and all around Europe and down under as well. People are starting to get wise to what's been going on. And I think that that's really what the globalists truly fear. So I would just like to say, once again, it's been a pleasure to be here. Really appreciate it. And to all Americans and Canadians who follow me, I really appreciate what you guys do as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you. My guest today has been the founder and director of Freedom Train International, Jim Ferguson. Good friend. Thank you. And we'll see you again soon, Jim.
Thanks a lot, David.